to let her walk out the door. It is not my call, and I understand that, but that's what I think. I will tell you, it is also unnerving to see that on a network where we've got two, count them, two non-white hosts in primetime, both of our non-white hosts in primetime are losing their shows, as is Katie Fang on the weekend. And that feels worse than bad.
So, Mark Lamont Hill, what's utterly bizarre about that rant from Rachel Maddow is that Joy Reid is being replaced on her show by not one person of colour, but three. Two African Americans and a Latino. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't it the complete opposite of what she just told her viewers?
Ooh, in Rachel's monologue, which I'm not sure why you called it a rant, but in her monologue, she said that it was a mistake to lose Joy. And prior to the part that you cut from, she explained Joy's talent. She explained why it was a loss. She never called the network racist. I mean, I understand that that's your interpretation, and
well,
I do think it's a
mistake. She said that the two people of colour in primetime were going, but she didn't point out that one of them is being replaced by three people of colour.
Right.
So the whole statement, the whole attack on her network was predicated on an absolute falsehood, which is that somehow they're taking the black people away, and this is awful. It's racist, was the clear insinuation.
Right, and I was trying to make a nuanced point, and if you allow me to finish the point uninterrupted as you allow Jason to, you'll hear it. I promise I won't go on a rant.
Okay. What
I'm saying is you can have a critique of someone making a mistake along the lines of race without them being racist. For example, saying, hey, we need racial representation on the show is to say that, hey, this is a network that has a huge black base, a huge black woman base. Hey, maybe it makes sense to have a popular black woman host stay on the show. That's her argument. There's an argument against it for ratings. I'm not making a case right now one way or the other on that point. My point more precisely is it's not necessarily racist, or you're not necessarily accusing someone of racism to say that they made a mistake along the lines of race. That's all I'm saying. And no, black people are not interchangeable. So even if I were to replace you, Piers, with another British white male host, not everybody has your talent. Not everybody has your knack for deep listening and careful listening. And so I can't say, well, I got rid of Piers, but here's another one. So, and I like the replacements, but I don't think that they're the same. And then finally here, Joy Reid, just to kind of what Jason said, to say she doesn't have any other talent, I think is just untrue. She has the fancy Harvard degree. She's an experienced journalist, and she has deep insights that she offers. Her show isn't about being a race baiter. This is the problem that I see that's the biggest, and that is that when someone responds to a race-based conversation, somehow they become the racist. She's responding to the cutting of DEI. She's responding to people saying DEI stands for didn't earn it. She's responding to people cutting affirmative action. All of that is race talk and race-based policy. She's critiquing the Republican response to race policy, and they're saying, look, she brought up race. No, she's pointing out the problem with how they're dealing with race.
Okay, let me bring in Sean Spicer, who's been smirking throughout your commentary there. Sean, your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, it's awful rich that Rachel Maddow, who works one day a week and makes $25 million, has some huge concern for Joy Reid. If you care about your friend that much and her well-being, offer one of the $25 million that you're getting to work one day a week to her. Second, I mean, with all due respect, if she were that popular, the ratings would reflect it. Her show was not being watched. People were tuning it out, and it was for a reason. They didn't like the topics, they didn't like her, but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's a business, and the business is to attract advertisers that make the network money. Clearly, that was not the case. If people really think you're that good at what you do, then they tune in. The audience grows or it stays stagnant. But in her case, it was on a massive decline. And that says that they didn't like her. They didn't like her topics. They didn't like what she was talking about. And it's pretty obvious that there's only so many times you can, play that shtick over and over again without people getting tired of it. I think that the ratings reflected that.
Yeah, I mean, Natalie Winters, there's no doubt. I mean, Fox has been absolutely crushing everyone in cable news now. They average 3 million viewers in prime time in the latest numbers, up 50% from the same month last year. MSNBC averaged 1.1 million, down 16%. CNN 500,000 pretty much, down 3%. And in Joy Reid's case, apparently the ratings on Tuesday without her jumped 16% just by not having her sitting there. Which doesn't entirely surprise me, because whenever I had the misfortune to catch her, she was incredibly incendiary in her race baiting. There was just no other way to describe it. I mean, Mark's being very charitable in trying to defend her only ever responding to what you think were race issues, and therefore if you criticise her, you yourself are being racist. But come on. She looked for every opportunity she could possibly find to accuse everybody who wasn't her skin colour of racism.
Piers, can you name one topic that where she invoked race?
And I would just add, even though MSNBC, I think they are overdosing on critical race theory, they find racism in every single corner, in every single story. And frankly, if Joy Reid were white and the tables were flipped and she was saying these things about people of color, I'm sure she would last about all of one show on cable news. But I think, frankly, this discussion, I think it sort of misses the mark. I think the reason why a lot of the MSNBC viewership has been absolutely cratering, in part, people don't buy into the ad hominem attacks. Just look at the election results. But this is a network that has lied to their audience day after day, show after show, not only about how President Trump is a threat to democracy, how he's an autocrat and authoritarian, and we're witnessing a takeover, a hostile takeover of this country, but they're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because in the same breath, right, where they preach the idea of democratically elected representatives and they're the staunch defenders of democracy, they're now actively opposing and try to use sort of outside of the system tactics to oppose and essentially take down a democratically elected president. So their sort of grassroots, really hardcore base viewership, they feel lied to. That's why they're abandoning. And your average American viewer doesn't want to partake in the sort of color revolution tactics and propaganda that they're pushing to smear President Trump with.
Yeah, and also I think, you know, when Mika and Joe went down to see Trump at Mar-a-Lago, I think that was seen by a lot of MSNBC viewers as a real betrayal. You know, for whatever good intentions they did it. I just think if you call someone a fascist for year after year after year, and then you go and have tea with them, it's not an easy thing to explain to your viewers. Anna, I mean, I want to play you a clip. This is where Megyn Kelly says her commentary about this, and then Don Lemon responded.
The big news tonight will be Joy Reid's final show on MSNBC. Single tear, white woman tears happening right here, Joy. She was officially fired over the weekend because she's a racist, horrible news anchor with no ratings.
The worst. Okay.
I do love the way that Don positions himself as the antidote to toxicity, and then tells people to go fuck themselves. But Anna, look, it's all blowing up. This, I do think it's interesting that MSNBC, having gone all in on Kamala Harris and all out on Trump because of the election result, now seem to be in some kind of crisis of confidence about what they should be. What do you think of it?
Well, I actually think that, you know, the obsession over the conversation on race and race baiting kind of misses the mark on what I think MSNBC is really vulnerable on, and that's the issue of trust and credibility among audience members or anyone who might be considering MSNBC as a news source. So, for instance, Kamala Harris did not run a flawless campaign, not by a long shot. Okay, her campaign was very flawed. It did not have a focused message. She was taking advice from, you know, corporate executives within her family, and she moved off of the economic issues that obviously voters consistently communicated through polling they cared the most about. And so when she goes on camera and says that Kamala Harris ran a flawless campaign after the election, in which Donald Trump wins all the swing states in the popular vote, I think audiences start to become more cynical about where they're getting their information. And so a lot of lies were kind of debunked in the aftermath of the election. And when I say lies, I'm specifically referring to how fantastic the Democratic Party is, how they really have a vision for the future, how flawless Kamala Harris is. You know, even though the aggregate of polls showed that she was trailing Donald Trump, we kept hearing all of these rosy news reports about how she was doing fantastic. And so I think the Democratic Party and the left in general really needs to have a moment of self-reflection instead of seeking out news content that validates everything that they believe and want to hear. And that's honestly the biggest flaw and downside of the Democratic Party at the moment. And people like Joy Reid, unfortunately, foster that kind of environment that made them think, no, we're killing it. We're doing great. Now, I don't think that MSNBC has learned the right lessons because they're basically replacing Joy Reid's hour with other individuals who are, never Trump Democrats, although Michael Steele used to be the head of the Republican National Committee, but nonetheless, he hates Trump. And so they're going to keep focusing on uplifting Democrats that I think really need to get back in touch with the American people and understand what their genuine concerns are. They're not doing that right now. I think they're looking for other mouthpieces that are willing to just tell them what they want to hear.
Mark, you're shaking your head. Why?
They're also hiring Eugene Daniels, who was a Kamala fanboy from Politico, to go over there and do this. So they're doubling down on stupid. I think it was said earlier, they're just getting cheaper versions, right? So Joy Reid probably signed her contract when MSNBC was Ascent. It's now flailing and falling apart financially and otherwise. So they're going in and getting cheaper versions of stupid.
Yeah, and it's interesting to watch CNN where Scott Jennings appears as the Republican voice and basically takes on sometimes 3-4 liberals at the same time, and often eats them all for breakfast. But it's very entertaining to watch. And Mark, you're shaking your head, but the problem I have with MSNBC, it's all completely one-way traffic. They're just not interested in having anybody on there who differs from the view that Trump's the devil and that's the end of it. Whereas I think what's happening at CNN with Scott Jennings is quite interesting. It's more interesting to watch. I like on this show, for example, as we're seeing right now, to have people with all different voices. The idea you only have one type of voice, particularly when you've just taken a massive beating with that voice in the election, it seems to me just bad business, isn't it?
No. To answer your question, the reason I was shaking my head was because it's simply not accurate what the person before me said. This idea that Joy Ann Reid was saying that the Democratic Party is perfect and that they made no mistakes and that all the campaigns were flawless. That's simply not factual. Now, I happen to believe that the Democratic Party made tons of mistakes, and I think
that
MSNBC.
Kamala Harris's campaign was flawless.
Right. So just again, hear me out, and then you can disagree, or we can agree. Who knows? Maybe if you hear me, you may find out you agree with me. Kamala Harris is one of the few people who was critical of the Biden administration's position on Gaza. She was one of the few people, along with Ayman Mohyeldin and Mehdi Hassan last year before he was fired, who spoke out against what the Biden/Harris administration did. She also spoke out against Kamala's response to it. I agree with you that they were too laudatory of the Kamala Harris campaign, and I agree with you that in general, they haven't done a sufficient autopsy of the Democratic Party, much less the Harris campaign, which I think could not have won anyway. I don't think she was a strong candidate, and I don't think she had a strong message to the American people. I suspect we agree on that. Where I disagree with you is that Kamala Harris was not unwilling to be critical. Joy Ann Reid was not unwilling to be critical of the party. I think the problem is that MSNBC in general is a left-wing / liberal, really, organ or political organ. Piers, no, I don't think that is inherently problematic. Donald Trump lost big the last election, and Fox News didn't hire me. They didn't double down and hire more.
Yeah, but Fox News have people like Jessica Tarlov on the 5 and stuff that they will regularly have people on the left to give the other side, and actually it's just more interesting. And that's fine. You're entitled to find Fox News more interesting. I happen to not find MSNBC interesting at all, so I'm not caping for MSNBC here. What I'm saying is that news outlets in general have a point of view, even ones that pretend that they don't. And I don't want to single MSNBC out as if they're the outlier ideological channel and the other ones are straight news. Nobody is straight news anymore. That's true, but I think they're the that's true, but I think they're the only ones.
MSNBC just isn't doing it well.
They're the only ones who pretty much never have a conservative. In other words, an opposite voice.
Well, and their business model sucks. I mean, they're failing. That's the point.
Yeah.
Fox, you can't credit. I mean, if you don't like Fox, that's fine. But at the end of the day, it's growing. So they're doing something right as a business. MSNBC, even if you ideologically, I agree with Mark on that, But if it worked for them, then go for it. Make money. It's not. And that's the point. At some point, the executives have to say, hey, you're not doing your job, which is we're supposed to make money as a company, as a business. So do something
It's clearly
different.
not. Wait, listen. It's clearly not working. Or there wouldn't be firing.
With all due respect, Sean, with all due respect, Sean,
I gotta jump back
with all due
in,
respect, Sean,
please.
that's a straw man. That's a straw man, Sean. I'm not disputing that companies make money. I'm not disputing that MSNBC is doing a sucky job. I'm not disputing that MSNBC's ratings are bad and that they have to make a different decision when the ratings are bad. I agree with all of those things, despite your arguments here. I'm saying that one, Joy Reid is not singular in that way. Everybody on MSNBC, this side of Rachel Maddow, sucks. So when you fire somebody at Rachel Maddow for sucking, when you fire somebody at MSNBC for sucking, it's somewhat of an arbitrary choice. I'm saying who are we choosing and why, and when we replace them.
Financial decision.
What do we replace them with?
Okay, listen. I want to move. I want to move on. I want to move on. Look, the only thing I would dispute, Mark, that you've said is when you claim that Rachel wasn't playing the race card when she attacked the network, she clearly was and was trying to make out that somehow.
I didn't say that. I said she didn't call them racist.
Hang on.
I said she didn't call them racist.
Well,
I said she didn't call them racist. I'm not going to allow you to misrepresent what I said. I said she didn't call the neighborhood racist.
Why else would she invoke? Why else would she invoke Joy Reid's skin colour if she, having been removed effectively because she was black, she was saying, when she's been replaced by 3 people of colour? It was preposterous. Anyway, look, let's move on. Let's move on.
You've misrepresented my position. It's fine, but
we've
that's
done
not what
20
I said.
minutes on this. It's more than I want to spend on MSNBC because they're getting the biggest audience right now they've ever had. So let's move on to the press pool purge. So let's take a shot here of the announcement.
As you all know, for decades, a group of DC-based journalists, the White House Correspondents Association, has long dictated which journalists get to ask questions of the President of the United States in these most intimate spaces. Not anymore. I am proud to announce that we are going to give the power back to the people who read your papers, who watch your television shows, and who listen to your radio stations. Moving forward, the White House press pool will be determined by the White House press team. Legacy outlets who have participated in the press pool for decades will still be allowed to join, fear not, but we will also be offering the privilege to well-deserving outlets who have never been allowed to share in this awesome responsibility.
So, Sean Spicer, what's your honest reaction to this? Because I gotta say,
I think it's
you do? Go on,
fantastic. Oh, absolutely. But just so audience understands, there's 2 things to know. Number one, the White House Correspondents Association has a set of criteria who can join it. And if you can't join it, they limit that by what you do for a living, whether your financial interests, your transparency with your company. There's a set of criteria. You can go on their website and read it. So, for example, I tried to join when I went to Newsmax. They rejected my application. So they get to determine who's in it. And then what happens is there's a list with what Caroline's referring to there is the pool. So there's, in smaller instances, not in the briefing room, obviously, the Oval Office, Air Force One, there is a pool. What is that? 1 or 2 print, wire reporters, cameras, photographers, and they among themselves, the White House Correspondents Association will rotate NBC, ABC News, Fox, whatever. And so every day they take a different turn. Then they disseminate that information to the rest of the media outlets. So the White House Correspondents restricts who can be part of that, thereby limiting who can go to the Oval Office or Air Force One. What Caroline announced there was they get to stay part of it, right? So you're still going to have NBC and ABC, but it's going to be augmented. They're going to allow a new media seat. They're going to add additional cameramen. This is actually more transparency, more media access, more appreciation for the White House correspondents. Under the Biden administration, they cut 440 press passes from independent journalism, and the White House Correspondents Association said nothing. These people don't care about press access. They don't care about the First Amendment. They care about controlling what the American people see, read, and hear by limiting who has access. And they're pissed that somebody now actually outside of them can go into the Oval Office or on Air Force One and actually disseminate information that's not the left-wing bias.
Yeah, listen, I don't actually have any objection to that for the reasons you've articulated very well. But the problem I do have is with the Associated Press getting barred from entering the Oval Office or travelling on Air Force One because they refused to use the new terminology Gulf of America for the Gulf of Mexico, as it was known before Donald Trump renamed it. And their position is they're an international organization, which they clearly indisputably are, and that many places outside of America continue to call it Gulf of Mexico, as it's been known historically. Why should they be barred for that?
Yeah. Well, it's actually much broader. It has to do with their whole style book, how they mandate what people, what other news organizations use. So they would start saying, we're going to capitalize the word black, but not white. We're going to use gender affirming care. We're going to use pronouns. Oh. They actually dictate everything that a lot of media associations and frankly, even U.S. government outlets use based on the style book. So here's the thing that people have to remember. The Associated Press still has their press passes. They're still in the White House briefing room. But the invitation to go into the president's office, they've restricted. That's not freedom of the press is allowing them to write what they want, to say what they want, and they still enjoy all of that. They enjoy full access to the White House briefing room. All their correspondents have their pass. The president has a right to decide who goes into his office. I can't walk into the Associated Press's office just because I have a First Amendment right to say things. This is ridiculous. They get to decide who goes into his office.
Okay.
That's his prerogative.
Okay, Mark, it's ridiculous apparently, but you're not having it.
The president's office isn't like walking into my office or Sean's office. That's sort of a dishonest comparison. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that Sure. The White House, Trump's office, and more broadly the White House, is not just a space. It's a signpost of access to democracy, access to the political process, and that's what we're concerned about. I agree with you that press freedom is about being able to write what you want without pressure, without any type of punishment. I think the issue here is if different people have different levels of access based on their style guide, based on what their political persuasion is, it encourages or incentivizes people to make certain choices versus others. At the end of the day here, I'm not even concerned about Trump. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I am concerned about Trump, but that's not my biggest concern. My concern here is I don't want particular political administrations, whether they're Democrat or Republican, making decisions about who comprises the press corps, who gets into certain rooms and who doesn't, because even if you trust Trump completely, or even if you trust the next president completely, there will be political organizations and political administrations who we cannot trust.
Okay.
And when that happens, I don't want them to be the deciders.
All right, let me bring in Jason.
But here's the point.
Hang on, Sean.
If you agree with everything that Mark said, which is, I think, very fair points, then where was this concern when the last administration cut 440 passes of journalists? Where was the concern when the White House correspondents restricted anyone else from joining
you made
the
that
pool?
point. It's a good point.
I love this, but these are not. Then where was all of those?
I understand. I think there is a double standard. I agree with you. And actually, the biggest.
I don't think it's a double standard. But we should have been concerned.
All right. The biggest attacker on journalism and journalistic rights actually was Barack Obama. Historically, he did more to erode the rights of journalists than anyone, never mind Trump. Let me bring in Anna here. I mean, it's a tricky area, this. What was clear is this extraordinary stat according to the National Journal. President Trump has taken over 1,000 questions from reporters in his first month of the second term, compared to Biden 141 and Obama 161. So this idea that he's not the most transparent president in modern times is for the birds. He clearly is. People may not like what he's saying, but he's taking questions from pretty much anyone all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm about to say things that will upset everyone on each side of the political aisle because, honestly, I think that there are bad actors on both sides. So, for instance, there was a lack of transparency under the Biden administration, and that lack of transparency had to do with the fact that he was suffering from mental decline and everyone around him was hiding him from the public. So he didn't have nearly enough press briefings. They were kind of evasive with important questions, and that cover-up ultimately destroyed the Democratic Party, certainly in the last election cycle. Now, in regard to Donald Trump, I agree that it is a good thing to include members of independent media, new media. I think that's generally speaking a great thing. I would be far more celebratory if Donald Trump wasn't so devastatingly petty and also retaliatory against media that doesn't, serve his interests or do exactly what he wants. So, the AP is a good example. I think another example is this lawsuit against 60 Minutes. Obviously, when you're airing an interview on television, you have time constraints. You have to cut down on some of the content or the interview answers so it fits in, so you can go to break. And I hate that model. I think live linear has a lot of downfalls, and that's one of them. But the idea that they intentionally edited her to make Kamala Harris sound better is laughable to me, because whether it's the word salad answer on what's happening in Israel and Gaza or the shortened answer, I don't think she really particularly had a great answer. It didn't make her look good. And Trump won the election. What are you doing suing 60 Minutes over this? That's insanity.
Well, I think you do. I think if you face, as he
100%.
did, if you face 2 years of relentless bullshit about Russia collusion, you've probably got a very, very cynical view of the way the very liberal skewed mainstream media has behaved towards you. And Trump, he's got I always say he has the thinnest skin I've ever met and the thickest. He can take stuff that would destroy anybody else, but he's going to react to absolutely every slight that anyone imposes on him. It's just his nature. He ain't going to change at 78, I can tell you.
I understand what you're saying, Pierce. I understand what you're saying, but understand that, do we value our Constitution or not? Do we value freedom of the press or not? Do we value the idea that the government cannot retaliate against you over your speech in America?
Yeah.
I value those things.
Yeah.
And it's really important for the president, through his actions, to prove that he also values those things.
Jason, you've been waiting patiently. What's your view of this?
He's proven a million times that he values the freedom of the press. The man went to the NABJ convention, sat down in front of 2 black women and probably a gay black man, I can't remember, went into the den of the people that hate him the most and took all their questions. They were late getting him on stage, late showing up. He took all their questions. The man is fearless, and he has every right to punch back. The Associated Press is Associated propaganda. It is the enemy of America. Donald Trump's not lying there. The Associated Press is part of this global establishment that wants to destroy American freedoms, and this man has every right to punch back. They need to be hit in the mouth. They lie every day. They distort every day. They're part of, again, I've heard you all say, hey, this isn't about race. Yes, it is. The Associated Press and all the American media have been pulling a racial hoax on voters and the American citizens for 60 straight years. If you don't support these left-wing propaganda deals, all of it, hook, line, and sinker, you're a racist. And there's no greater smear. Nothing can hurt your economic viability, opportunities in the media, opportunities just to be seen as a normal citizen than these leftists calling you a racist for supporting the Constitution and just common sense.
Okay. I've got to say, I don't.
Beating up the Associated propaganda.
I don't think the Associated Press is the biggest threat America faces right now. If I'm having run a national newspaper in the UK for 10 years, honestly, the AP it has its issues like all these agencies, but actually they do a pretty good, pretty impartial job most of the time. I think it's been wildly exaggerated that they're some kind of media version of ISIS. But let me bring in Natalie here, because I want to talk to Natalie about the other thing that's come out, which is Jeff Bezos of the Washington Post, who emailed all employees to say that we're going to be writing every day in support and defense of 2 pillars, personal liberties and free markets. We'll cover other topics too, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others. They said, I'm of America and for America and proud to be so. Our country didn't get here by being typical. And a big part of America's success has been freedom in the economic realm and everywhere else. Freedom is ethical. It minimizes coercion and practical. It drives creativity, invention, and prosperity. Now, critics have said this is another example of a tech oligarch, bending the knee to Trump, smothering press freedom and so on. I just wonder why he would want to do this. If you're owning a national newspaper in America, why would you publicly announce that you're going to actively not have views contrary to the view that you hold?
Well, Piers, as a newly minted member of this whole new media initiative that the White House is rolling out, I would like to just real quickly say one thing, and that is that this whole narrative that it's the White House Correspondents Association that is the victim in all of this, it's the American people. And what you're hearing is continued victim blaming coming out of these legacy media outlets who, not just for the last 4 years of Joe Biden, totally did not cover anything to do with his mental cognitive capacities and capabilities being absolutely zero, but they colluded with the Biden White House, with big tech, to censor Americans who dared to speak out about COVID, about vaccines, about election fraud, about every single issue. So spare me the performative activism that these people care about free speech or freedom of the press. And frankly, I find it quite ironic, if not hypocritical, that Mark Lamont Hill, who I believe is on the payroll of Al Jazeera, so the Qatari government, wants to sit there and say that free speech and freedom of the press is so important. I'd suggest that you look up that country's rules when it comes to freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. It's not that great. I'd invite you to criticize Qatar on air, but you probably won't because you lose your paycheck.
Give me an example. Give me an example of that. Give me an example of that. You just said, what is your issue with Qatar's stance on free speech? Since you're criticizing the Qatari government's position on free press, what is it?
I dare you to criticize the migrant workers that they used to build the stadium.
No. We're talking about free speech.
Well, I'll tell you what.